All right. So we're learning Kutasichas Chelek Yud Aleph, the first Sicha to Pashas Boi. This Sicha has many footnotes, and in the footnotes there's a lot of extended elaboration on the topic that is being discussed in the Sicha. But should we go through the Ha'aris, it will take us much more time, and that's not really possible tonight. So we'll focus mainly on the inside of the Sicha without the extra insights in the footnotes. I might mention here and there something from a footnote, but we're not going to read it inside. Saying the Bekeshel Chag Pesach in our Pasha, the Torah tells us in connection to the Yontif of Pesach, that on the first day, that is referring, the first day is referring to Tesvav Nissen, Mikra Kedesh, there's going to be a Yontif, Kol Melocha lo ye'osu bohem. No work should be done. Except that which is for the sake of food, that alone you can do on Yontif. Hainu, that means Yontif asur b'asiachs melacha keShabbos. Yontif is forbidden to do melacha just like Shabbos. Prat lemelacha is shein letzerech eichel nefesh shein mutaris b'Yontif, except for work that is tzerech eichel nefesh for food purposes. These are allowed on Yontif. Now, Chazal later on added on different qualifications that any work that can be done before Yontif, you should not be allowed to do on Yontif. But midiraisa and even midrabanan, a meleches oichel nefesh that cannot be done before Yontif certainly can be done on Yontif. Midiraisa, even if it could be done before Yontif, it would be allowed to be done on Yontif, because that's what the pasuk here in our pasha clearly states. That which will be eaten for human consumption, that alone is okay to be done on Yontif. So the Rabbi says, that points out the simple thing that this Isur Melacha on Yontif is repeated numerous times in Chumash. And when you look in the footnote number 2, the Rebbe lists 12 different psukim all over Chumash where this Isur of Melach on Yontif is repeated. Ubekulam Nema, and this is by each Yontif. But by all of these Yom Tovim, the pasuk states like this: Kol meleches avoda lo yisasu. In all the other psukim in the Torah, where the Isur Melacha of Yontif is mentioned, in all of them, the wording in the pasuk always is Kol meleches avoda lo yisasu. Any meleches avoda, labor of work, or work of labor, you cannot do. And in all of these other psukim, the Torah does not write clearly, like in our pasha, that meleches eichel nefesh you could do. So in our pasuk, in our pasha, it doesn't use the term meleches avoida, but it explicitly points out that meleches eichel nefesh is okay. All over Chumash, 12 other times where the Isur Melacha of Yontif is mentioned, it always says, Kol meleches avoida lo yisasu, but it does not mention that meleches eichel nefesh you could do. So we have to understand what is the reason for these two differences. The one difference that here it uses the term Kol melacha lo ye'osu bohem, and it doesn't say Kol meleches avoida, whereas all over Chumash, it always uses the term Meleches Avoda. That's one shinui. And the other shinui, here the Torah explicitly tells us that Meleches Eichel Nefesh, Achash Yochel Nefesh, you could do. And in all the other 12 instances where the Torah talks about the Isur Melacha on Yom Tov, the Torah does not say clearly that Meleches Eichel Nefesh you could do. So what's the reason for these changes? Hinei Ramban kosav al zeh. So the Ramban actually addresses this. And this is a very fundamental Ramban. The Ramban writes like this. Pirush Meleches Avodah. What is the meaning of the term Meleches Avodah when it's written together like that? That means, says the Ramban, Kol Melacha she'eino letzorech eichel nefesh. The term Meleches Avodah means all types of work excluding eichel nefesh. In other words, Meleches Avodah by definition already excludes eichel nefesh. Ke'inyan shenema, as it says in Pasuk, Sheishes yomim taved v'siso kol melachtecha. And then there's a pasuk bechol avodah basode, and there's in Yecheskel v'nevadetem v'nizratem, that avodah, work of avodah, meleches avodah, implies a type of work that you work the whole week, and it's the work in the field. It's the avodah, zriya, and stuff like that. Umelacha shi ba'oichel nefesh, but work that is like food type of work, kitchen work. He meleches hano'o, loy meleches avodah. That is a melecha for hano'o, for enjoyment, because we enjoy the food. This is not termed meleches avodah. That's what the Ramban says. V'zeh mizbaer b'Torah. And this is actually explained in Chumash. Ki b'chag hamatzos she'o matchila, b'negei Pesach, which the Torah first addresses. Over there, it says, she'o matchila, kol melacha lo ya'asu b'hem. That's in our Pasha. It uses the term kol melacha lo ya'asu b'hem, because it doesn't say meleches avodah, says the Ramban. It says kol melacha. Melacha means any type of melacha. Hu tzrach lefarish. Therefore, the Torah needed to explain, but work for eichel nefesh, you're allowed to do. B'shar yomim tovim, says the Ramban, but all other yomim tovim, yekatzer v'yoymar. So the Torah chooses a shorter way of making that point by saying, kol meleches avodah lo yisasu. All over Chumash, by all the other yomim tovim, the Torah just says, don't do meleches avodah, which means lesser kol melacha she'eineno eichel nefesh, to forbid any work which is not eichel nefesh. By using the term meleches avodah in all other cases in Chumash, the Torah already, by using that term, tells us that it excludes meleches eichel nefesh. Uleidiash eichel nefesh mutar b'hen. And the Torah is basically letting us know that meleches eichel nefesh is okay to do on Yom Tov. The Ramban says, and I can prove it to you, because you can look in all the other 12 places in Chumash, not one of them will the Torah use the term kol melacha. And and also, in all those 12 other places in Chumash, the Torah has no need to explicitly say that eichel nefesh you could do. Ki meleches avodah yelamid al zeh v'chulu, because the term meleches avodah already teaches that by default. But mipnei shemaskir shom b'chag hamatzos kol melacha, but because in our Pasha, by chag hamatzos, by Pesach, the Torah uses the term kol melacha, not meleches avodah. That's why hutzrach lefarish asher yochel echol nefesh ulevad yos lochem, that eichel nefesh you could do. That's why in this Pasha the Torah does have to explicitly state the fact that eichel nefesh is okay, because it just says kol melacha. Kol melacha means any work. That means we might think also eichel nefesh. So the Torah tells us, but eichel nefesh you could do. Umevur midivrei haramban. So the Rebbe says that what can we get? What is the point that we're getting here from this Ramban? That by definition, what type of melacha did the Torah aser on Yom Tov? Only meleches avodah. And that in itself teaches us that from the outset, meleches eichel nefesh was never forbidden. Due to the fact that Eichel Nefesh just doesn't fall under that category called Meleches Avodah. So here in the Sikha, the Rebbe is not addressing, so how come in our Pasha, the Torah doesn't write the same way, called Meleches Avodah Lo Yisasu, and the Torah has to tell us, therefore, because it uses the term called Melacha Lo Yasu B'hem, that Eichel Nefesh you could do. Why is it different in this Pasha by Chag HaMatzos? So that we'll see later on, but in a deeper explanation for that. But simply put, the Torah had to first make the general point here by Chag HaMatzos. But we'll see further insight into that later on in the Sikha. But first, the Rebbe is going to address a different general topic about the heter of Eichel Nefesh on Yontif. Siv Beis. Hine ha-heter das yes meleches Eichel Nefesh be Yontif efshel levar bebeis efani. There are two ways how we can explain why Eichel Nefesh you could do on Yontif. Aleph, one way, Gam meleches Eichel Nefesh asuris mitzad atzma. Really, meleches Eichel Nefesh per se would also be forbidden to do on Yontif. Because they really are also part of the general term that it says in this week's Pasha, Kol Melacha Lo Yasbem. Any Melacha you shouldn't do. Which means any Melacha, any, even Eichel Nefesh. But if the Melacha is done for the purpose of Eichel Nefesh, the Torah removed the Isur of Eichel Nefesh, Meleches Eichel Nefesh, from all other Melachis. That the need for the food is the cause for the heter to do these Melachis. As if the Torah is telling us, rule number one, any Melacha you can't do. And from the perspective of that rule number one, even Meleches Eichel Nefesh would be forbidden. And then the Torah comes and tells us, rule number two, considering the fact that Eichel Nefesh is very important, Eichel Nefesh, person needs food. So let's remove now Eichel Nefesh from this Isser and we'll allow it. But that is like, not that by definition this was never falling under the Isur. Initially, it does fall under the Isur, but then the consideration for the Tzorech Eichel Nefesh is what is matirit. That's one way how to understand it. Another way, base, and this number base, the second way of understanding it, Kein Nire Medivra Ramban. Apparently, the Ramban looks at it like the second way, as the Rabbi is going to explain what the second way is. That the melacha of Eichel Nefesh from the outset never was part of the Isur Melacha on Yontif. It's a part of the Isur Melacha on Shabbos, but Isur Melacha on Yontif, the Isur of Eichel Nefesh, Meleches Eichel Nefesh, they never were part of that Isur. And the pasuk in our Pasha, where it says, but Eichel Nefesh, that alone you could do, is not like a step two of being matirit. It's just to teach us the rule, the general rule. It is an explanation for what it means by Yontif, and it says, don't do any work. So there is a clarification. That what that means is not all melachas like it means by Shabbos, rather it means all melachas except for Eichel Nefesh. Eichel Nefesh is not falling under the Isur to begin with. So the second part of the pasuk, Eichel Nefesh, is not a new heter, rather it is a clarification for the first part where it says don't do melacha on Yontif. Hainu sha'asheye ochel lechol nefesh hu simen vekvius agdara shel elu melachas shel echal b'eno yisur. In other words, when the pasuk says ach asheye ochel lechol nefesh, you could do, it is basically giving us an understanding. It's like a sign for us and a classification what melachas don't fall under the isur. The Torah is teaching us, you should just know that melachas eichel nefesh don't fall under the isur of Yom Tov. Now, what's the difference if we say version Aleph, that initially the isur is all-encompassing, including eichel nefesh, and then the Torah is giving us a heter that eichel nefesh you could do due to the need of eichel nefesh, or we say version Beis that eichel nefesh lechatchila is not part of the isur. It seems to be just semantics. Says the Rebbe, no. Nafkemina lahalocha. There's actually an nafkemina. Hamisane b'Yom Tov. Someone who fasts on Yom Tov. Not going to get into it. Are you allowed to fast on Yom Tov? But there are ways how it is possible for an individual to make a tainis on Yom Tov. So the question is, imutar mideraisa b'melechas eichel nefesh. Would such an individual who is fasting on Yom Tov, would he be allowed to do melachas eichel nefesh? He's having a tainis today. Lehasvar de melachas eila asuris mitzad atzmam ela sheutru mitam shein tzerich eichel nefesh. According to version A, that by definition eichel nefesh work is also forbidden. It was only allowed due to the need of eichel nefesh. So then we understand that the heter only applies for someone who indeed needs the food. Someone who doesn't need the food, he can't. He's not eating. He's fasting today. He is not allowed to do melechas eichel nefesh. Aval hamisane b'Yom Tov. The one who is fasting, he should be still also to do this work. But according to the second version, see the base option, that these malachas to begin with are not also on Yom Tov. So then, even if somebody fasts on Yom Tov, he should still be allowed to do these malachas, because these malachas are just not also on Yom Tov at all. Now, these two options of how to look at it, the Rebbe is going to explain how we may learn pshat in the machloikis of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in Masechtas Beitza, that they are arguing about these two things. The pliga bozeh Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel b'Masechtas Beitza. Beis Shammai yomrim ein metzin lo yisakot v'chulu l'reshus harabim u'Beis Hillel matirin. A young child, a small child that can't walk on his own, is it okay to move the child from Reshus HaYochid out into Reshus HaRabim on Yom Tov? Beis Shammai says you can't. Beis Hillel matirin. Beis Hillel say you could. Umefarish b'Gemara. The Gemara on this Mishnah says the pliga I amrina miteich shehutra letzerich eichel nefesh hutra nam shlo letzerich. The Gemara says the machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is a machlekes in concept. Once the Torah is matir eichel nefesh, are they matir to eichel nefesh only if it's indeed specifically eichel nefesh mamish, or once it was mutter also for eichel nefesh, once it was mutter for eichel nefesh, it's mutter even if it's not clearly falling under the eichel nefesh. That means the following: to take a Yom Tov meal, a chont, or not a chont or anything, yeah, from your house to your friend's house on Yom Tov. That is allowed. That's eichel nefesh. That's l'tzerich eichel nefesh. So that is definitely mutter. Taking out a child, that's not for eichel nefesh. It's not food. So Beis Shammai, says the Gemara, they hold only eichel nefesh was allowed. Taking a child out from the Shus Hayach to the Shus Rabbi, you're not allowed because it's not eichel nefesh. They take it very literal. It has to be eichel nefesh. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, they say once hitzah is allowed for eichel nefesh, you can do hitzah even if it's not eichel nefesh, like taking out the child, or like taking your talis to shul, or like taking the key to your house to shul. It's not eichel nefesh, but it's hitzah. Miteich shehutra sheletzerich, hutra name sheleilech tzerich. So that's what the Gemara explains is at the root of the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So the Pashtus Yeshlema, Yeshlefarish, the Beis Hillel Savre, the Be'acha she'yochel echol nefesh, hufku meloches echol nefesh migeder isur mikol. So on a deeper level, says the Rebbe, that what the Gemara is trying to say, we might say, later on in the Sikha, the Rebbe is going to say that it's not necessarily so. But for the time being, this is the initial approach that the Rebbe is taking. That on a deeper level, we can say that what really Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing about, what the Gemara means to say, by saying that they're arguing if Hutra Shaloi L'Tzoyrech or not, depends on the two versions that we learned before. That Beis Hillel hold that when it says in the pasuk Ash Achash Yochel Chol Nefesh, Hufku Melachas Echol Nefesh Migeder Isur Mikore, it removes the Melachas Echol Nefesh from the whole Isur totally. And once that happens, Lochein Mutar is saying Gam Keshe'enim L'Tzerech Echol Nefesh. Once you remove these type of work, so then even if it's not for Eichel Nefesh specifically, but these malachas are not asur anymore. Once Hitzah Mireshus L'Reshus was allowed for the sake of Eichel Nefesh, it removed the Isur of Hitzah from the Isur Malacha on Yontif. So if it's not part of the Isurim on Yontif, so then if you're Moitzi Mireshus L'Reshus, not for Eichel Nefesh, it still should be okay. Because the whole Isur doesn't apply for these type of malachas. Beis Shammai Savre, Beis Shammai say that no, the Asher Yochel Echol Nefesh Hu Tam Lahater Malachas Elu. Beis Shammai, we could say that the reason why they say that it's only L'Tzerech Echol Nefesh and not Shaloi L'Tzerech is because the Torah really says all malacha, including Eichel Nefesh, is also. And then the Torah says, but if you're doing Eichel Nefesh specifically, we are matir it. There's a special pu'ula to be matir it. If there's a special pu'ula to be matir it due to the Eichel Nefesh, therefore it's limited. It's only Eichel Nefesh and nothing else. And if it's not for Eichel Nefesh, the original Isur remains on these pu'ulas. And that's why Beis Shammai say you cannot take the child out into Reshus Rabbi. So that's the initial understanding in the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, based on the Gemara's explanation that they argue. Do we say that Miteich Shehutra L'Tzoyrech, Hutra Name Shaloi L'Tzoyrech, or do we say no, that it's only Hutra L'Tzoyrech and not Shaloi L'Tzoyrech? That it depends if we're saying that the Isur really applies to Eichel Nefesh and then the Torah is just matter it for Eichel Nefesh, or do we say that once the Torah says Achash Yochel Chol Nefesh, the Torah is basically telling us these things don't fall under the Isur to begin with, and if so, then once it's Shaloi L'Tzoyrech, once it's L'Tzoyrech, it's also Shaloi L'Tzoyrech. So now in Siv Gimel, the Rebbe is going to present us with the way the Alter Rebbe and Balatani in Shulchan Aruch writes this halacha. Admur azokin b'shulchanei kaisef. Rishen v'shvi shal Pesach. V'chag ha'shvuos v'chulu. Hein ha'nikroim yomim tevim. V'chol ha'ois meleches avoda be'echad men harei ze loike min ha'Torah. whoever does malach on any of these Yom Tovim is chayiv malchus min ha-Torah shenemar. It says in pasuk, kol meleches avodah lo yisasu. You cannot do any meleches avodah. Then the Alter Rebbe continues. Umahu meleches avodah. What is meleches avodah? Kol melacha she'eino nasis be'oichel le'mashke v'chu. Any work which is not something that's done with food or drink. Aval kol melacha nasis be'oichel le'mashke. But anything that you do with food or drink, nikroim kol melachis elu v'chulu meleches oichel nefesh. So this type of work is termed meleches oichel nefesh. The Torah is matir. These words, shenemar, as it says in pasuk, quoting the pasuk from our pasuk. So the Rebbe is going to now analyze the Alter Rebbe's words. From the beginning of the words of the Alter Rebbe, where he writes, any work which you don't do with food or drink, by classifying meleches avodah as such, mashma kisvaris Ramban. This sounds exactly like what the Ramban writes, no? That meleches avodah is any work except for Eichel Nefesh. By default, meleches avodah does not include Eichel Nefesh. That's what he writes. Kol melacha she'eino nasis be'eichel mashke. That's exactly the idea that the Ramban tells us. The meleches avodah pirush melach she'eino l'tzerich Eichel Nefesh. V'lochein meleches Eichel Nefesh muteres mikol, which implies the meleches Eichel Nefesh is mutter from the outset. But then when you read further in the Alter Rebbe, where he writes, that the Torah was matir these meleches Eichel Nefesh for the sake of achilas yontiv. So by saying that the Torah is matir, mashma, that implies that really meleches Eichel Nefesh is also part of the forbidden work on yontiv. Just that the Torah had to specifically be matirit, the pasuk didan in our pasuk, the tzerich achilas yontiv. V'hainu shetzerich eichel nefesh hu hatam lehatir melachas elu. In other words, that the eichel nefesh qualification I'm sorry, I don't know why. Back? Yeah, I'm back. Is everybody back? I'm not sure what happened. All right. So in the second part of the halacha, the Alter Rebbe implies that on its own, these malachas are part of the Istur, and the Torah needs a special heter from the pasuk nefesh to allow them. So how are we supposed to understand Alter Rebbe? So the Rebbe is going on to explain the whole machlekes between the shita of Beis Hillel based on the machlekes between Rashi and Tosfos. V'hine, the pirush dat Beis Hillel mitoich shehutra letzerich hutra name shaloi letzerich pliege Rashi v'Tosfos. We already established before the Mishnah and the Gemara's explanation that Beis Hillel holds that you're allowed to take a child out from Reshus HaYachid into Reshus HaRabim on Yom Tov, because once a melacha was allowed for the sake of Eichel Nefesh, it's already allowed also when it's not Tzerich Eichel Nefesh, like taking a child out in Reshus HaRabim. So Pliege Rashi v'Tosfos. On this Gemara, Rashi and Tosfos have an argument. Rashi mefarish shehutra melacha gam im eino letzerich klal. That this is allowed even if there's no tzerich at all. That this melacha, once the Torah was matered, it's mutter all the way. Just the Rabbanon hold that you still need somewhat of a need for yontif in the melacha. But midiraisa, even if there's no need whatsoever, so for example, taking a key out on yontif. So can you do that? So according to Rashi, even if you don't need the key on Yontif at all, it's a key to your summer home. You're not going there now. You don't need it. So midiraisa, although there's no need whatsoever in this Heitzah, but once Heitzah was mutter, it's mutter, and that's it. There's just no issur at all. Midrabanan, you need some tzedach, but midiraisa, there's no need. The Tosfos argues with Rashi, and they hold that heter shaleile tzedach hainu she'ein bo tzedach eichel nefesh. Tosfos says no. That's not what the Gemara means. That Beis Hillel holds that because it was hutra letzedach, hutra name shaleile tzedach. That's not what shaleile tzedach means. That there's no need at all. It means, says Tosfos, that there's no tzedach eichel nefesh. There's no need food-wise in the avodah, in the malacha. There is a need in having some type of tzedach in this malacha for the day of Yom Tov, like taking a child out to the Reshus HaRabim. Yes, it's not a need of food, but I need because I want to go on a walk with the child or something like that. I want to take the child to the playground. I want to go eat by my in-laws. I want to go eat by my friend. And so I need to take the child along. So it is not part of Eichel Nefesh, the Melacha, but it's Eirech Hayom. There is somewhat of a need for Yontiv. In other words, that even midiraisa, according to Tosfos, it's not that the Melacha became mutter altogether. Rather, it's only mutter if there is at least somewhat of a need for Yom Tov. Examples that are given for a melacha that there is no tzerech at all. The Talmud Yerushalmi gives an example. Somebody is cooking nevela meat on Yom Tov. Yeah, so there's no, he can't eat it, and there's no need for it at all. Or there are things that are tzerech hayom, but not eichel nefesh, like I mentioned taking a child out in Reshus HaRabim, or washing, a person washing his body, part of his body, whatever. It's not tzerech eichel nefesh, but it's tzerech Yom Tov, so that's something that is tzerech hayom in it, and things like that. So according to Rashi, the Gemara's words that Beis Hillel holds that miteich shehutra shaloy letzerech, hutra gam letzerech, is quite literal. Once it was muter letzerech eichel nefesh, hutra gam shaloy letzerech, if there is no need whatsoever. Tosfos says what the Gemara means is that once it was muter letzerech eichel nefesh, it's muter also shaloy letzerech eichel nefesh, but there has to be a tzerech for this work to be done. Lekavod Yom Tov, somehow there has to be a tzerech tzas for Yom Tov. Question is, how are we supposed to understand Tesis? Because we're going to read it inside, but I'll explain to you the question. If we say that Tesis holds, like the first version in the understanding, that Be'etzem Oichel Nefesh is part of the Isur, and then the Torah is materit because of Oichel Nefesh. So if we take that approach, then it should be only Oichel Nefesh, because if that is the whole reason why we're materit, so then it has to be like Bishamai, specifically that. But if we're saying like version 2, which we understood before, that that's what Beis Hillel basically holds, that once the Torah was matrid for Tzorech Eichel Nefesh, the Torah tells us that to begin with there's no Isser in these malachas. So if to begin with there's no Isser in these malachas, then it should be mutter across the board. So where does Tosfos come up with this idea, but there has to be some Tzorech for Yontif? If it's mutter to begin with, it's mutter. So it's mutter. There's no Isser in this work at all. So then it should be mutter, and there shouldn't be any qualifications and conditions to that mutter. Let's read that inside. Based on what we have said before, that Beis Hillel savre the malachas eichel nefesh le'nichlelu mechalak tchila b'klal ha'isur, that Beis Hillel's approach is that eichel nefesh work is lechatchila not part of the isur. Muvenes heitev svaras Rashi. Based on that, Rashi's svara makes very much sense. The mutar is midiraisa gamimein le'tzorech klal, that this type of work is mutar even if there's no need at all. Omnum ledas ha-Tosfos tzorech la'avin. But Tosfos we have to understand. Let's skip the bracket for a moment and go to the next page where he says the question. If, according to Beis Hillel, these malachas to begin with were not part of the Isur, then they should be mutter even if they're not for L'Tzorech Hayom at all. And in the brackets, let's read now the brackets. The Rabbi makes an extra point just to clarify the question, that we can't just say that Tosfos argues on Rashi on this very premise. Let's read it inside in the brackets. We can't say that Tosfos argues on Rashi. Can't say that Tosfos says that Beis Hillel holds that Eichel Nefesh is a reason to be materit. Because if that is the approach, that Tosfos holds, that Beis Hillel holds, that Eichel Nefesh is a cause why we should be matir the Isur, but really there is an Isur and there's a special heter. If so, then it shouldn't be sufficient if there is somewhat of a need for the day. Then it should be like Beit Shammai, that then any work that is not specifically Eichel Nefesh should not be falling under the heter. So we must understand that Tosfos agrees with the general premise that Beis Hillel holds that melachas Eichel Nefesh are mutter to begin with. And based on this understanding, why is Tosfos making a condition that that's only so if there's a tzorech hayom k'tzas? There has to be somewhat of a need for the day. If it's mutter, it's mutter. End of discussion. Under all circumstances. The Rebbe explains like this. Have the machlokes zu the Rashi and Tosfos yesh leimar. In explaining the machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos, we can explain it as follows.
I'm not surprised.
Sorry. Okay. Behezber machleke zu de Rashi beteisves Shleiman. Is Baale el b'shem Ramban. Shemeloches eichel nefesh einon meloches avoda elo meloches hano. In the beginning of the Sikha, when we brought the Ramban used the following term, that meloches eichel nefesh are not part of what the Torah terms meleches avoda, because they're not meleches avoda, they are meleches hano. They fall under a different category called meleches hano. That's how the Ramban puts it. And therefore, they do not fall under the Isra of meleches avoda l'sas. Ule Rashi. So we can say like this: Le Rashi hapirush desvara zu de le meloches l'serich eichel nefesh hem be'etzem sug meyuchad shemehusan meleches hano. Rashi holds that meloches eichel nefesh get their own category. They are be'etzem a different type of work called meleches hano. In other words, hainu she'enon skukes lekavona so odom basias hameloches bichdei lahofchon meleches hano. There's no need for a special intention by the person doing the work to make them into meleches hano. They are meleches hano by definition. Just by the fact that they're not stam work, but work with food, therefore they are automatically categorized as meleches hano. There's no need for the person to do something or have a specific intention to make them into that category. And therefore, ein hefresh ben asiyas meloches elu letachlis v'tzerich shel hano v'tainug la'asiyason sheloi l'shem tachlis v'tzerich ze oy acher. Therefore, according to this understanding, because by definition they're called meleches hano, and there's no need for us to do anything, so it makes no difference if the person actually does them for meleches hano, for oichel or other bodily pleasures or needs, or he does it for some other purpose, because the classification still stays. They are called meleches hano and not meleches avoda, and that's it. The mekiven shamelocha mehusa meleches hano, because by definition it's meleches hano. They are not part of meleches avoda. That's why Rashi says you can do them no matter what. Even if you're not doing it for meleches hayom at all. But Teisvis holds different. Work is work. So meleches eichel nefesh are not, by definition, different from all other types of work. Elo, ve'im nasis letzerich hano asadam beyontiv, just that if they are done for a person's hano on yontiv, any hano, tzerich eichel nefesh, or tzerich achashul hano sayam, it doesn't have to be dafka, but it has to be for hanoas ha'odam beyontiv. So it could be food, that he's eating food. It could be taking his kid out to the playground, but he enjoys that on yontiv. So there is a hanoah for the person. So if the person does the work for hanoah on yontiv, so then they don't fall under the isra of meleches avoda. But if they're not for the sake of that day, then these actions get reclassified as meleches avoda, which are forbidden. That's why Teisvis requires there has to be some tzerich on yontiv, because Rashi holds that by definition, these works are not part of meleches avoda, which is like the simple understanding in the Ramban, and therefore Rashi holds that it makes no difference if you do it for tzerich yontiv or stam. it's not asur, it's lachatchila mutar. Tosfos says, really, oichel nefesh malacha is really part of any other malacha. It doesn't say in the Sikha, but like we see on Shabbos. Shabbos, we have no such differentiation. So it's part. It's just that the Torah is telling us that if you're doing it for oichel nefesh, which means for the person's enjoyment and pleasure on Yom Tov, then it's not part of the Melacha Isur of Yom Tov. It's not part of Melechas Aveda. But it's only if you do it in that context. If you're not doing it in that context, then it's a Melacha that is also. That's why Tosfos requires that there has to be Tzerech Hayom Ktsas. Besignen Acher Ktsas. In other words, the Rebbe makes the same point, but in a different wording, which is better to understand the flow further on. Rashi Sever, the Be'acha She'yachol Lechol Nefesh, Yasol Lochem, Higdiru HaTorah Melachos Elu Kesug B'fnei Atzmo. By the pasuk in this week's parsha, where it says Acha She'yachol Lechol Nefesh, Yasol Lochem, that only that which will be eaten, that you can do. With these words, the Torah was Magdir, the Geder of these Melachos Kesug B'fnei Atzmo, as its own category, called Melechas Hanoah in the Rambam. Mitzad Atzmom Veguf Pu'uloson. On their own, by definition, these actions, the Guf HaPe'ula itself, is called Melechas Hanoah, and it's mutar. V'Tosfos Savre, the Be'acha She'yachol Yasol Lochem, Higdiru HaTorah Melachos Elu Lefi Matarason V'Kavonos Asiyoson. But Tosfos looks at it that the Torah, by saying these words, is clarifying how these malachas depend on their intent and purpose. When they're done for the sake of a person's pleasure, food or other pleasure, then they are called malachas hanoah. And then they indeed don't fall under the category of melechas aveda. But if not, then they're part of melechas aveda. The gamma Tosfos svirele bedas beshilo the oichel nefesh who simen vegeder shel suga malachas. So therefore, what was our question on Tosfos? Initially, we thought that by the fact that the Tosfos is requiring that there has to be tzorech hayom, it means that really it is asur, and we need a special heter. And not that by definition they don't fall under this isur. But now that we understand Tosfos much better, we can understand that no, Tosfos also holds that melechas oichel nefesh is a simen vegeder shel suga melachos she'eino nichlolis be'isur melechas aveda. Tosfos agrees that melechas oichel nefesh makes its own category. Just that Tosfos says, when does it fall under this own category that lechatchila is not part of the isur? Only if it's done with tzorech hanoah of Yom Tov. So that's why he requires tzorech ktsas. But he also agrees that the understanding of Beis Hillel is not like Beis Shammai, that there is a special heter for Eichel Nefesh, and that's why Beis Shammai limits it to only Eichel Nefesh Mamish. Tosfos doesn't look at it like that. Tosfos agrees with the Ramban and with Rashi that Beis Hillel holds that Eichel Nefesh is just its own category. Just that Tosfos says, in order for the Eichel Nefesh to deserve to be in that category of Melechas Hanoah, it has to be done with a tzorech for Yom Tov. Otherwise, it doesn't fall under this category, but it goes back to the general category of Melechas Aveda. Al pizeh yukshe oid yoser bedivre admar azoken kanal siv gimel. So now the question on the Alter Rebbe becomes even stronger. The Rebbe makes that point at the end of the sif in brackets, because now that we have established very strongly that according to everyone, Rashi and Tosfos, there is Eichel Nefesh from the outset is not part of the Isur, So then why is the Alter Rebbe using the terminology that by Eichel Nefesh, the Torah was matir it? Didn't we establish that both Rashi and Tosfos agree that Beis Hillel holds that Eichel Nefesh from the outset is not part of the Isur? So why is the Alter Rebbe using the term the Torah was matir it? So the Rebbe now in Sif Hey is going to change this whole understanding that it is not so simple that everybody agrees with that. Although it seems that we must say that, and like we said before, that Mimon Avshach, if Tosfos holds that, like the first Oifen, that the Torah is materit, then it should be limited to only Eichel Nefesh, like Shittas B'Shamai. And on the flip side, if he says that it's a different category, that L'chatchila is not Asur, then why does it need qualifications? So it seems like there's no answer to that, but it's not so pashut. So that's what we're going to continue now in Sifei. Ulam efshal avad b'svaris ha'toisvis. The gambis hillel savre the eichel nefesh habe tam lahater meloches elu hasuris mitzad atzmo. There is a different way to approach it. That really, Tosfos holds that meleches eichel nefesh really is part of the isur, and the fact that eichel nefesh is mutter is because the tzorech of eichel nefesh brings about a special heter. Elo. Why is that difficult? Because if that is so, then why isn't the halacha like B'Shamai that only Eichel Nefesh is mutter? Elo shebeoifen haheter svirele lebeis Hillel she'ein hakavana shel tzorech Eichel Nefesh nitcho ha'isur b'mlachas elu. Just that Beis Hillel and B'Shamai argue how that heter functions. Beis Hillel holds that it doesn't mean that by Eichel Nefesh, the Isur was nitche. In other words, really there's an Isur, but due to Eichel Nefesh, the Isur is pushed aside. Hainu, what does that mean? Shechashivuse shel tzorech zeh doiche Isur malacha b'yomtiv. The need for Eichel Nefesh is more important than the Isur. So it's like doiche the Isur. And therefore, if it would be that way, then it would be very limited. What is mutter is only Eichel Nefesh, which is the shit of Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel doesn't hold like that. What does Beis Hillel hold? Rather, Beis Hillel says that what causes the heter is indeed the need for tzorech Eichel Nefesh. But once it was mutter, it was matir the melacha altogether. The entire melacha became mutter. So Chazal used the term kiven the itche. Not about this, but there's a concept called kiven the itche. Once it was pushed off, it's pushed off all the way. So you can say like once the Torah was deiche the isur for Eichel Nefesh, that's it. It's mutter legamre. And therefore, because it's huter, it's legamre, it's totally muter, therefore, when we're saying that it's muter for Eichel Nefesh, it is muter even more than what you need for Yontif specifically. We don't need that the entire melacha should be for Achilas Hayom. You're allowed to shecht an entire behema. All you need is one kazai. Yeah, one steak you need. You don't need the whole behema today. Still, you're allowed to shecht the entire behema. Once this work has somewhat of a need for Eichel Nefesh, so now that makes it mutter altogether. Gamim chelka. Even if part or even most of it is not really needed, but it still pushes away the Isur altogether. And based on this same logic, that once it was mutter for eichel nefesh, you can be matter the whole melacha, even if most of it you don't really need right now, eichel nefesh. With the same logic, Beis Hillel hold that even if it's not eichel nefesh, it also is mutter. But that means the following. Melachas eile shehutru afim eisnois l'shatzal chanos adam v'lo letzerich eichel nefesh yesh ben tzad hashove lemelachas letzerich eichel nefesh. These type of other hanos ha'adam, other pleasures of the person's bodily needs or pleasures, they have a common denominator with eichel nefesh. Shekulam tzerich ha'adam. They all are part of the person's needs. So in a in concept, this is considered like part of the eichel nefesh. It's a little bit of tzerich eichel nefesh. Once we already have seen that melachas l'tzerich nefesh are mutter, even if only a little bit of it is tzerich eichel nefesh. Likewise, same idea, if there is a tzerich of other hanos be'echus in quality, it's considered a miktsas of tzerich eichel nefesh. Eichel nefesh means food mamish. Other hanos are not food, but it's part of the, we can call it a little bit like eichel nefesh. Like a person needs to wash, his body is sweaty, so he washes part of his body in oifna mutar b'yontif. It's okay. It's considered also part of eichel nefesh somewhat. So that is how Tosfos understands the words of Beis Hillel, that because it's hutra letzerich, hutach gam shaloyre tzerich, mikiven shalotzerich eichel nefesh, hutra melacha. Once we have seen that for melechas eichel nefesh, that it was mutter the melacha, heter be'etzem ha-melacha was totally mutter, hutra shaloyre tzerich. So it was mutter also for other, lechol shar al loy tzerich shemekutz la tzerich ktsas, any other loy tzerich which is outside of the tzerich ktsas, out of the little bit tzerich that you need. Like we said, there's a little bit of tzerich eichel nefesh, so you matter the rest. So likewise, all the other tzrachim are also mutter for the tzerich ktsas of eichel nefesh. Bein shu miktsas hat tzerich eichel nefesh mamish, no difference if it's mamish for eichel nefesh, but just a little bit of it. Bein shu tzerich asher yesh b'tzad hashove. Likewise, any tzerich that has this common denominator, which is considered a miktsas in abstract form, it's also considered a little bit of it, but toichen, eichus, in concept and in quality, me'at tzerich eichel nefesh, it can fall under this general approach of the bodily need. That is why Tosfos requires that there has to be somewhat of a need for tzerich hayom, because if it's not having any need for tzerich hayom, then we're losing this whole concept of it being part of, in the extended, broader understanding of tzerich eichel nefesh. Because if there's no tzerich at all, so then it's not serving any function in the bodily need. Now we can understand Alter Rebbe. Hine, al pi hanal, the shloima the gam Beis Hillel savre dachas yochel yelselachem hu tam lehater melachas elu. Now that we say that even Beis Hillel, it's not so simple to say that Beis Hillel hold definitely that it's mutar lechatchila. No, we can say that Beis Hillel also hold that really melachas eichel nefesh is really part of the isra of melachas avodah, and there's just a special heter to be mattered due to the need of tzerich eichel nefesh. Yeshloimar, the Admurazok in Svira Lekain. So we can say that the Alter Rebbe holds like this. This is exactly the Alter Rebbe's understanding of the halacha. And his words will be clearly understood, but let's first be magdim, bring in another point. Why indeed in our Pasha does the Torah write different than all the other 12 places in Chumash? Which then necessitates the Torah to explicitly say the heter of Asiyas Malach Zeichen Nefesh. The Torah could have written, just like the Torah writes by all other Yom Tovim, Kol Meleches Aveda, V'Gomer, U'Bimele Movin, Shemelech Zeichen Nefesh, Shemelech Zano, Melech Atchila, Lenichlol V'Aisu. The Torah could have just written Melech Aveda, which we said Melech Aveda by definition excludes Melech Zeichen Nefesh, and then the Torah would have saved itself the need to specify that Melech Zeichen Nefesh is mutter. So how come in our Pasha the Torah doesn't do what the Torah does in all other instances, all other 12 places? Vabir. Explanation is the Isur to do Melacha on Yontif, first time in Chumash, is in our Pasha. That's why the Torah is medayik and does not write so the Torah is medayik not to write here like everywhere else, and by default we'll know that Melech Zeichen Nefesh is not part. The Torah wants to put down the ground rule. The ground rule is Kol Melacha Stam, any Melacha Lo Ye'osa B'hem should not be done on Yom Tov. Umelamdeinu, which teaches us that really, initially, all the malachas are asur on Yom Tov. And that's why the Torah writes this all-encompassing terminology. Kol melacha lo ya'asa b'hem. Umoisif, then the Torah adds on. Achashe ya'ochel, but eichel nefesh ya'asa lachem. That you could do. Shall deze moving, the way the Torah puts it is in the pasuk itself is very clear. That here the Torah is telling us, okay, and this I'm going to be matir you, and with the reason mitam shehein letzerech achilas adam, because they are for the tzerech eichel nefesh. Ubeparshis emer v'chulu, but then by all other yomim tovim, mekatze v'nemar kol melech saveda le'yasa b'hem. Once we have established already in Pasha's Boy how this works, that initially Kol Melacha Lo Yaseh B'hem, and then the Torah tells us, but I'm making you a special heter for Eichel Nefesh. Once that has been established in Pasha's Boy, by the first instance when the Torah talks about this, so now when it comes by all other Yom Tovim, the Torah can use the shorter way to be mekatzer and to say kol meleches aveda lo yaseh b'hem mekiven she'en makom letos al dezeh shemelachas eichel nefesh lenesu meikar kapish Ramban. Because now, once we know already from Pasha's Boy how this works, when it says now in the Torah kol meleches aveda lo yaseh b'hem, nobody is gonna make a mistake and think that meleches eichel nefesh is melechatchila not nesar. Because now, once we already have established in Pasha's Boy, the first time this is mentioned, that really by definition, Eichel Nefesh is also really part of the Isur. And rather they just were made mutter due to the need of Eichel Nefesh. So once that has been established, the Torah doesn't have to again and again and again write it that way. We know already from Pasha's Boy. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, Hilchus Yom Tov, he's talking now about all the Yomim Tovim, talking what is Asur on Yom Tov. So that's why he brings the pasuk that is used by all Yomim Tovim, because he's talking about all Yom Tovim. And he writes, Kol ha'ois melechas aveda, harei ze loike, shenema kol melechas aveda lo yisas. U'meisiv levaer, u'mau melechas aveda. And then he goes on, okay, what is part of melechas aveda? Kol melecha she'ena nasis beichel ha'mashke. Any work which is not with food. Because melechas aveda does exclude any work with food. Hainu bepasuk ze eina meduber ele b'negel melechas aveda. To tell us that the pasuk kol melechas aveda lo ya'asu b'hem excludes any eichel nefesh. And what is the definition of melechas aveda? V'lo nisparish din melechas. Hainu bepasuk ze eina meduber ele b'negel melechas aveda. V'lo nisparish din melechas eichel nefesh. It's just that the Torah doesn't specify it, but we know that melechas aveda excludes eichel nefesh. Achakach mamshich levar din melechas eichel nefesh u'mekeirei. Then the Alter Rebbe moves on, step 2 in the halacha, to explain to us what is the din of melechas eichel nefesh and what is the source for it. So he goes on. Avol kol melacha nasis beichel nikroin melachas eichel nefesh shatera itiro laseisa. They are called eichel nefesh, and the Torah was matir. Shenemar achas sheyachol eichel nefesh ulevad yoslochem. The omru ach mashma the memato metzia mechlal isur hitiro. The wording in Chumash achas sheyachol nefesh implies that this is now an exception to the rule. So it's something that really should fall under the isur, but the Torah is matir. Not that lechatchila it's mutter. What is the heroa that we can all take out from this? The fact that the Torah allows us to do malacha on Yontif teaches us how important Simchas Yontif is a central theme on Yom Tov. Because that's the reason why on Shabbos can't we do Eichel Nefesh? Yom Tov, due to Simchas Yom Tov, the Torah is matir melechas Eichel Nefesh. So we see how Simcha is a very central theme when it comes to Yom Tov. As it says in Chassidus, that the oir that is drawn down on Yom Tov goes on and illuminates every day of the year. Based on what we just said, that Simcha is a central theme on Yom Tov. So a person must feel the Simcha of Yom Tov the whole year. Because if the oir of Yom Tov shines the entire year, and the main thing of Yom Tov, a central theme in Yom Tov is Simcha, that means that the Simcha of Yom Tov we ought to feel throughout the entire year. That means in addition to the obligation that a person ought to feel simcha whenever he performs a mitzvah, which is called simcha shel mitzvah, besides for that, Simchas Yom Tov causes us that we should be infused with a sense of simcha the entire day, and not only when we do a mitzvah, when there is the additional point of simcha shel mitzvah, but the whole day. If Yom Tov is Meir shines the entire year, and the main thing, and we see from this heter of Eichel Nefesh how important simcha is on Yom Tov, making it a major theme of Yom Tov. Therefore, our entire year should be infused with simcha, and the Eibishter should help that we should feel that. Kol hayom Yivdus Hashem b'simcha in all our inyanim, the entire day, every waking moment, we should feel simcha, and we should have also reasons to be b'simcha b'golui mamish.